So welcome. We're here with Erin Cloud. She's an attorney, organizer, and movement strategist, and founder of the Movement for Family Power. The organization works to end family policing and build community-based systems of care and support. Presently, she's the director of the Justice Project at the Advancement Project. Thank you for joining us, Erin. We want to start first off with your personal journey. How did you enter this work? What led you to find or start the movement for family power?
Thank you so much. It's so great to see you and to talk to you and have this conversation. And only one thing I'll start off with say is I definitely co-founded Movement for Family Power with Lisa Sangoy, who is a tremendous visionary and a deep partner in this work. Um, but that really is kind of a midpoint. And so the question is what's my journey to this, right? I talk to people all the time and say, I came to understand family policing as a system through being and working as a public defender, even though many parts of my life and community had this system in it. And I think that that's really that sentence, which I'll explain a little bit more, both explains like my theory of change and how I got to where I am. So oftentimes people say, well, I had this system in my life, my neighborhood, in my community, and then I decided I wanted to fight against it. I think the family policing system, the one that I grew up understanding to be the foster system or the child welfare system, was so ingrained in so many parts of lives that in a world where this you're in the demographic, which is black and brown or poor, you are just kind of involved in the system. It just exists in all these different contours of life. So then I went to law school. Um, and for me, going to law school, I am the first person in my family to go to law school. I didn't really, I'm the first Black woman in my family to graduate from college. Like, I didn't have a sense of, okay, this is why I'm going to law school because I have these particular legal examples. But I knew I did not want to put people into cages because that's something that I had seen. I said, I don't want to do that. And I ended up doing this fellowship at Fordham University School of Law, which was a law and integrative social work fellowship, where they placed me in the family policing system and the family court system at Bronx Defenders representing parents. And I remember having this moment where I realized that this is where all the women were. You know, if you go into Bronx family court, arraignments are at the bottom, and then family court kind of takes the top floors. And so the way that it's structured is that criminal court has an entrance, but many of the family people coming to family court have a different entrance. And what you just see is just all of a sudden strollers just go up escalators, elevators. You see pregnant people going up elevators. You see all these children and families just kind of going up these elevators and getting housed in this different system. And I think from that point, I both started to see this system all around me, but I also started to understand that a lot of the lens of social justice that I had been taught and even had wanted to go to law school for wasn't really centered on Black femme bodies.
Mm.
And there was this entire industry and carceral system that was set up. And that's really how I got into the legal world of family policing. And then Lisa and I co-founded Movement for Family Power, essentially because at that time there wasn't really a dedicated space that was funded to support organizers that were resisting the system. There's always people supporting organizers, so there's no nonprofit in the world that can ever lay claim to doing that first. But I think what we were saying that there needs to be kind of like persistent, diligent space for people to kind of support organizers that are working to resist this particular system.
Thank you. I think this takes us to understanding a little bit more about family policing. I think described visually just in the space of the court system of how, bodies are sort of almost by floor are organized to like regulate. Just definitionally, how are you using the word family policing system? And why a change of language from the welfare system?
So I encourage anyone who wants to really like dig through or think this to look at. We do have a book called How to End Family Policing that I co-authored with Erica Miners, Charity Tolliver, and Shannon Darby Perez. But the first chapter talks about this particular evolution of this term with a conversation with Jasmine Wally, Victoria Copeland, and Brianna Harvey. So Brianna Harvey and Victoria Copeland really are the first people who kind of published this term family policing system. And it
Mm,
comes from really people that were being policed, right? So people that were experiencing what we call the child welfare system weren't calling it welfare. They're saying it feels like the cops. It is policing me. It is policing my body. Like it is, those are the words that they were using, that people were using, right?
mm,
And so Brianna and Victoria are like, well, why are we still utilizing terms like welfare and care when that's not what people who are experiencing the system are calling it?
mm,
And so they made a decision that we should be talking about this system in the term of family policing system, right? And there had been other iterations. I remember when we, started thinking about, okay, we're going to drop the word care and welfare. So we're going to stop calling it the foster care system and saying the foster system. Then
mm,
there was, a turn to talk about family regulation, which is still a term that people use as the system as a regulatory body. But I
mm,
think what Brianna and Victoria brought to the space is saying, like, also, if we use policing, it helps also not only reflect what people are already saying about the system, but also can connect activists and organizers to understand this carceral system. And we could bring in tools of movements around non-reformist reform, around abolitionist frameworks that maybe we will have to play with, maybe we'll have to rediscover through our movement, but
mm.
that we can adapt and utilize these tools. And so this term comes from both real life experience, real terms that people were using, and also the desire to use frameworks to help us get out of the system. But all that aside, I always say to people, it just is a policing system. If I say to you right now, I'm calling child welfare system on you, I'm calling CPS, no one's going to look at me and say, thank you. I'm
Mm,
so happy either I'm going to get groceries tonight.
mm,
People are going to look at you with a sense of terror, a sense of fear, a sense of resentment. No one's going to say thank you for calling CPS. And I think when you have that reality check,
mm,
even for the people who support this particular system, if I said I was calling CPS on them, they still would be upset.
mm,
And that's because it is fundamentally at its core a system that punishes,
mm.
not a system that cares. And nobody wants to be entrapped in a system that punishes. And so we have to really decide purposefully, intentionally, and thoughtfully to move away from the language that really makes it feel easier to continue to build systems of punishment when we really could be building systems of care.
I think the example that you gave is a really powerful one of, does the threat to call CPS, is it welcome, is it a sign of care, or is it a sign of punishment? What are other concrete examples that indicate this policing aspect of the family system? Just for people who may not be familiar, that's one. And, just to really break it down, because you said this is lived experiences. So what have you seen, just to break the misunderstanding that people still hold, perhaps, of the child welfare system or the foster care system?
So I think one thing that people tend to believe is that if they call CPS, there is a way for someone to get support. I
Mm,
think that is oftentimes what people think is possible. And I say, well, I thought this was a system that could like maybe like manage whatever is happening in the household. So they conceptualize this like I always say people like Mary Poppins. They conceptualize a Mary Poppins flying into someone's home, fixing everything, right? That's just not how the system is set up.
mm,
First and foremost, like when you call CPS, you are calling an investigative system. The call immediately goes to an investigation.
mm,
There may be certain systems that can drop it down to what we call like a prevention call, and we can get to that in a second. But the vast majority of people who are making a call to CPS are then thrusting an investigation onto a family.
mm,
And so when we think about investigative tools, those are not social work tools. Those are different types of questions, different things you're going for. You're doing an actual investigation of safety. And I
Mm,
think people say, well, what's so bad about like investigating safety? Well, theoretically, that's what police say that they're doing. That's what ICE say that they're doing. Every carceral system says they're investigating safety,
mm,
right? So, that's not a new concept for us. The second piece is that to do those investigations, many of these systems are co-training with retired detectives. They have MOUs with the NYPD or the police departments, depending on where you're listening. They're coming to people's homes without warrants, but also with the police, and they're going through systems. They're doing body checks where, sometimes they're asking children to strip down and check their bodies without parental consent, without warrants. Like, this is not groceries. This is not
mm.
therapy. Even if we believe those things could be put into place, and sometimes they are put into place, that is not the nature of an investigative call and what happens in the first 24 to 48 hours. The second thing I think people misunderstand is that this is a policing system that is banking on welfare dollars. So the way the system is actually designed is that the system draws from, what would otherwise be available or could be available to actually support families. So, there's a long history of the family policing system, but not to bore you all with details, you all should read Laura Briggs and Dorothy Roberts and all the people who write about this. Um, but essentially, what happens is that we've created a massive welfare program for the family police and for foster system caretakers, but not for families, pregnant people, parents, or people who actually
Mm,
go to get benefits. And I say that's really important is that not only are we sending people to do strip searches, but we're using welfare dollars to support that, which then also means people can't get the things that people believe that they're giving, which is like food,
mm.
diapers, formula, the things that they actually could buy if they had cash assistance, the supports that they actually do need. So those calls are not only punitive in their form and function, but they're also punitive in the way they divest from the actual material resources that people could use to support themselves and their families.
I think that's a really important point, and because we will talk about, the abolitionist perspective that your work brings, and we'll also provide like a library list. So the folks that you mentioned, will list the readings to companion to this interview. Um, you did talk about the link between policing, prisons, and other systems of state control, but I wanted you to maybe draw those connections a little bit clearer for those folks to see how they're interconnected, maybe through an example or to concretize how these systems kind of really operate together.
So I'm going to give a couple examples, but I'm going to start with the simplest one that I think everyone knows. Without a doubt, no matter where I go, they'll be like, the people will understand there's a foster care to prison pipeline, point
Mm,
blank period. They'll be like, yes, I know there's a foster care to prison pipeline. I'm like, yes, then why would you ever want to continue to fuel that pipeline? And
mm,
I think what people don't do is the second part of it is where they say, well, why is there a pipeline? I think people that perceive there's a foster care prison pipeline because I think a lot of times people perceive that there's then a brokenness of young people that must force them into
mm, mm,
these carceral systems, rather than saying that fundamentally we've broken the apparatus which could support people, which just pushes them into these pipelines.
mm,
So that's fundamental. Second, I would say there are just really clear examples. So, for example, I started to talk about this the way that the police and CPS work together. So, they effectuate a lot of the home invasion. So, you don't necessarily need a warrant, depending, most places, you don't need a warrant for a CPS investigation. People are working to actively change that. There are some nuances there for people that are listening say, but But for the most part, the NY, police are accompanying CPS oftentimes in these initial calls. And
mm,
if you understand if they're accompanying CPS at the initial calls, that means they're also listening and getting statements. They're also getting non-Mirandized statements, right? And
mm,
they're doing that because they have a civil, what we call like a civil enforcer, which is CPS, which is offering and opening a door to a larger breadth of an investigation.
Hmm.
The second is police officers, district attorneys are large reporters into the family policing system, and they're told to report. So we see this oftentimes in domestic violence cases where we see prosecutors calling CPS
Hmm.
on someone who is has experienced intimate partner violence and saying that they're protecting the kids. Another way that we see this is simply by virtue of mass incarceration of parents.
Hmm.
So, what we see together between the intersection of incarceration and the family policing system is in the family policing system, at the same time that all, the crime bill and all the things that people understand were being passed, there was also this other bill being passed called the Adoption Safe Families Act. The Adoption Safe Families Act actually reduce the amount of time that someone had to reunify with their child. So let me put this all together. You have, the crime bill, which is increasing the amount of people that can be incarcerated,
Hmm.
upping sentences, increasing the length of time people are being incarcerated. You have, welfare reform at the same time in the 90s, which is really divesting from the social safety nets. And at the same time, you have ASFA, which kicks in, which fast tracks adoption
Hmm.
when someone has at month 15. So what does that mean? That means if I am a parent, I am struggling to find actual material resources because the social safety net has been divested. If I get picked up by the criminal legal system, I'm going to have a higher chance of being incarcerated and a longer sentence. And simply by virtue of having a time period over 15 months, I'm now going to face termination of parental rights.
Hmm.
So you see this, what people call a collateral consequence, but really a direct consequence of mass incarceration,
Yeah.
is you have the vast removal of many, many, many children into the family policing system simply because of the way they were sentenced and arrested and pushed away, which then feeds this giant family policing system.
In your work, what are the common misunderstandings or myths or misconceptions that people have in the work, or what are some myths that we might be able to kind of challenge through this interview, because part of this law plus liberation is a political education, and to to kind of bring some of this knowledge to not just lawyers but just to community members who might say, but what about the children? What about safety? What about harm to the children? What will happen there? So what are some responses to that, but also like common misconceptions that you find in your work?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that um, one common misconception, I wouldn't say it's a common misconception. I think one thing that is true about talking about the family policing system is that you're always talking to someone in the world that has some relationship to a family, good, bad, or indifferent. You might be, if you're talking about other systems, you might have heard about ICE, you might have heard about prison, but it may not have like directly impacted you or been in your circle. Everyone has some form of a family,
Hmm.
which means that everyone can imagine good and bad and indifferent and hard families.
Hmm.
And so I want to just start there. If you're listening to this and you're having a conversation and you're seeing your family right now and you're seeing harm in your family, I believe you. I believe that has happened. I don't think anything that I can say about the family policing system will ever get rid of what people have experienced.
Hmm.
I think the misconception is that the family policing system could, as a general policy, prevent that. And I say that really directly. I believe every clock, what's the statement? What's the thing? Clock strikes this, you're right twice a day, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the
Hmm.
clock, right? I think everyone can have an individual time in saying, well, I liked this caseworker or I liked this cop. This person was nice to me. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about the family policing system, and quite frankly, any carceral system, is that It's not an individual relationship. This is a large scale policy response to a general population,
mm,
which means the way we have to look at it is it over time and in mass addressing the issue of child safety? And
mm,
that answer is just 100% no, it is not.
mm,
Everything might have done one thing for one person at one time, but over the course of time, it's not creating or building safety. More specifically, it's not preventing child fatalities. So a lot of people support the family policing system because they say, well, but there are really horrible people that hurt and kill their children. That is correct. That is a thing that people have done. It is not the vast majority of people. It is not the overwhelming people that are entangled in the system. And yet, that is a thing that is horrible that has happened.
mm,
There is a new paper by Kelly Fong and Frank Edwards where they systematically show that as a policy intervention, family policing is not reducing that number. So,
mm,
as, and I say that to be so clear. We're taught that this is an individual response when really it's a policy response. It's amassing billions of dollars. It's constructing the way we live our lives. And it's not have doesn't have the evidence to show that it's actually saving children's lives. It's not making a dent in it. The numbers are the same. No matter how much more money we put into the system, it's not doing that work. It's
mm,
just not doing it. I think the last piece I would tell people is that it does a ton of harm, even when it's not preventing harm.
mm,
And so the last misconception I would say is it's not just about the horrific removals that are harmful. It's not just about the termination of parental rights, which we call the civil death penalty, which fundamentally fracture. There is this community dimension to the family policing system that impacts us all. The fact that we live, I, as a parent who have been really fortunate to not have CPS called on me, have adjusted my patterns of being and way of mothering for the fear and threat of CPS. As a Black mother, I think about it. That fact that we have a culture now that feels more comfortable with picking up the phone and calling CPS versus figuring out how to address safety with a child
mm,
is an impact on all of us. Many, many, many other nations, that is not their response.
mm,
But the one of the biggest misconceptions is that we as a people have adjusted to carceral logics in the family policing system. And that means that we're not engaging with the hard conversations of talking to each other about each other's parenting,
mm,
about, helping a kid when they are in need. We don't do that anymore because we feel the safety net of just being able to call someone else and dreaming that CPS can do it, right? Or I can just call the cops on you, or I can call CPS on you. When really that's just not the way change happens. It's not the way safety is built. And we have all adjusted in some way to adapt and normalize that kind of fiction in being.
Thank you for that. I think that does help us to turn to, and you talked already about the disinvestment from the welfare system. So then, what would it mean to truly invest in families instead of this carceral approach? So looking at what kind of model or policy should we strive for or put in place?
Yeah, there's like lots of studies on this. So while there's studies that show that family policing as a system is not an investment that prevents harm like child fatalities, and in fact creates conditions for sexual assault,
Mm,
um, there are equal studies, actually I think more studies that talk about the types of things we could be doing to address the mistreatment of young people. One of which is just providing housing.
mm,
Housing has been shown to be one of the greatest ways to stabilize a family and reduce maltreatment.
mm,
Another is increasing the minimum to a living wage, like, even by $1. That reduces maltreatment by a large percentage. The earned income tax credit. those that actually, like, there's studies that show that actually the harm that people are concerned about, which we are all concerned about, including me, those things actually have policies that can change and address that type of maltreatment. There's also studies that show that green space, like adding more green space
Mm.
into communities, reduces child maltreatment. But these are not the things that you hear people saying that they are going to do, nor are you hearing people talk about how those types of interventions actually are the things that can reduce the harm, the severe abuse, and those types of problems. There's also always going to be aspects of harm that human beings um, engage in, this is the best way to put it, that aren't necessarily going to be fixed by housing. Sure, that is true. And I want to just like stop right there and say, I know that. If you're listening to this and you're saying, but there's people that do bad things and you do have a house, like, sure, that is true.
Mhm.
Let's also remind ourselves that
Mhm.
there's a lot of people where that can fix, and that's part of our job, right?
Yeah.
Let's limit and think about what happens when we're talking about things that are not going to necessarily be fixed by a material resource. Then you have studies that show that like teaching about real sex education and bodily autonomy are massive interventions into sexual assault. Massive interventions. We are, as a country right now, divesting from sexual health and reproductive health within schools.
Mm.
That is scary. Like,
Right.
that's super scary because that places more people that are marginalized genders at risk of sexual assault. And so I know that people were taught that the only way to address sexual assault is through the carceral system, but that's just simply not true.
Mhm.
And it's not helping us to pretend that it is.
I think it's really important that collectively, what you're saying is that investing in the material resources that were actually taken out of sort of the welfare system, and then this additional sort of sex education, holistically will begin to address some of the harms, right? Um, you mentioned a couple of times about race, and how does race factor into the family policing system? I wanted to come back to that point. What are the sort of racial logics that underlie this system?
Well, first, I'll just say, like, the first point is that at every point of contact, Black people fare worse. So we're more likely to be removed. First of all, we're more likely to live in neighborhoods where we're being policed by CPS.
Mm,
Second, we're more likely to be have our kids, once there is an investigation, for that investigation to be indicated, that we're more likely to face removals. We're more likely to have that child be moved out of a family network into a non-biological network, and we're more likely to face termination of parental rights. So every like outcome point, Black people fare worse,
mm,
Native people fare worse. So just fundamentally, and I that's a fact of the system. And I always say to people, there's only really two ways to think about that issue.
mm,
One is you think that we're faring worse, we're disproportionately impacted because we're just worse, right? That we just like we should have more of our kids taken. And that is a line of thinking and scholarship that people who support this system genuinely agree with. They think it is racist not to remove more Black kids. That is a perspective that they share. And I say that to people because I want people to situate themselves. Like, if that's where you are and you want to deny the racial impacts, then you are sitting with those people.
mhm,
The other way to say is like, oh, Black people are facing disproportionate impacts because there's a problem with this system that does that, and the system is policing Black and brown people, and it is racist itself. So you either believe that it's racist that it's not taking more people, or you believe that it's racist because it is taking so many of our people. There's
mm,
there's no middle ground here.
mm,
So the other piece of this system that I think connects with race is the family policing system is a system of race making in the United States. So it's an experience that creates our understanding of what is Black and what is white. And what I mean by that is like the idea of like, how do we create race? You
Mm,
know, how does the system maintain a racial caste in the United States? Well, it does it in many ways. It does it through the prison system, it does it through our immigration enforcement system, and it does it through the family policing system.
mm,
From the very beginning, Black reproductive bodies were the government was entitled to take our children.
right.
Our country is founded on the fact that enslavement in a Black body meant that you could never bear a free child.
Mm,
That's not the same system of enslavement everywhere around the world. It's a system that was put in place in the United States. So there could be enslavement in perpetuity. The foundation of that experience, of the fact that like our bodies are ones where our kids can be taken from us, moved around, shuffled between different people in the force and legitimized through laws, that experience is one that is still manifest in the family policing system. And the fact that it's happening en masse to Black people and it is historically rooted to chattel slavery means that it is a legacy of slavery. It is a legacy of what we believe we can do in the United States to Black people in a way that we would not do to white people. Of course, it doesn't mean that white people aren't impacted, but it is a way that race is created. And it's a way that when white people are impacted, they become less valuable even within their own whiteness, right? So it's the way poverty is constructed. And so not only is this system about race because it's disproportionately harming Black people, it also is a way in which Black people can continue to be controlled in this particular system that we live in right now.
mm. I wanted to connect or get your thoughts on how family policing connects with reproductive justice movement, right? The reproductive justice movement also is not just about abortion or not abortion, but about autonomy over one's body and ability to kind of construct one's family, which seems to kind of come against this family policing model. How do you see these two area, these movements sort of like intersecting in through your work? Are there organizing happening, campaigns that draw these connections?
Absolutely. So I would say first and foremost, I would really encourage people to read Killing the Black Body by Dorothy Roberts. And Shattered Bonds. These were really fundamental pieces that talk about reproductive justice and family policing. So one, you know, I think a lot of people don't realize the difference between reproductive rights and reproductive justice. So reproductive justice in of itself is a Black vision. And so in its tenets, it says not only you have the right to have personal bodily autonomy, you have the right to have children or not have children and parent in safe and sustainable communities without government interaction.
Mm,
So this or without government infringement, not government interaction, right? And so this is a tenet of reproductive justice, right? This is not an addition, this is not an explanation. It literally talks about your ability to parent in a society that is safe and sustainable.
mm,
Second and foremost, the reproductive justice is built on the concept of choice, right? The ability to choose, the ability to be in your body, the ability to have that type of autonomy as well. There's nothing more problematic or that is subversive to body autonomy than physically putting your hands on a kid to bag their urine at birth without their consent, like
mm,
literally bagging genitals to take pee to test their drugs. It's not just lack of informed consent to a parent, it's lack of consent for the child. Like no one's consenting for this child except for, hospital systems, and they're literally bagging their bodies. There's nothing more subversive than having a child tell you something really hard about their life or even unsafe about their life, and you just reporting it because you're a mandated reporter to CPS.
mm,
That completely really undermines, bodily autonomy and choice. Grabbing kids, taking them from their homes without choice, right? Again, this is an infringement on bodily autonomy. The ability then to have to live your life in family through a court system, that is not living in a safe community. So yes, there are campaigns. There is the Maternal Health and Dignity Act in New York right now, which is fighting for informed consent. People can look to Elephant Circle in Colorado. They have a number of campaigns that they run, but all of these are fundamentally reproductive justice campaigns, because they fight for dignity and autonomy of pregnant and parenting people. When we're fighting for informed consent before you drug test a pregnant or parenting person, we're saying you can't just do what you want to their body because you feel like it. You
Mhm.
have to ask them first, and you can't just take things from their body and feed it into the family policing system because you feel like they're a risk. You still have to talk to people who are people who are pregnant and new parents in the system, and that is fundamentally human, fundamentally important, and is just core to what reproductive justice is.
Thank you for that. And I asked that because we have another episode that does focus on reproductive justice, just to have listeners sort of make those connections. So slowly winding down, in terms of, really lifting up and amplifying grassroots organizing. Through Movement for Family Power or other campaigns, what have you learned from impacted parents and youth organizers? Are there any specific campaigns you'd like to amplify, or things that to direct our attention, to get involved with?
Yeah, so I would love to direct everyone's attention to Stolen Children's Month. So that's going to be the month of June. Stolen Children's Month was created by Ashley Albert, who is a directly impacted parent, and now it's a month that has goes across the nation. And essentially, Stolen Children's Month is a month where we remember the children that have been taken by the family policing system, ICE, and incarceration. It's a movement of solidarity to all the systems that disappear children and families. And so people should follow on Instagram, look up online, Stolen Children's Month. And you can host a vigil in your area, and you can connect with the larger movement. So please consider that. Um, this past weekend, I just had the honor to go again to Black Mothers March, which will be reconvening in 2031. But within the next 5 years, the goal is for there to be local Black Mothers Marches every Mother's Day to build up local power. So there will be more information about how you can get involved in your local community with local organizers or to start your own march. And you can go to Black Mothers March, probably .org. I should know the end of it. But there will be respond and power guides. There'll be ways to link up and do this work. And we hope that we swell and get bigger so that in 2031, we're even bigger than we've ever been across the nation. And then I almost every place has mothers honestly working to resist this system. Um, Operation Stop CPS in North Carolina, Philly Voice for Change in Philadelphia, Maryland Families Together in Maryland. And I lift these things up because they are local groups that you can plug into right now. And if you can't find one, build one. And
Mm.
in the meanwhile, if you are still, trying to figure it out, turn on Corey Best podcast. He has a great podcast and he's doing a True Narratives campaign. And the True Narratives campaign is to expose the realities of the family policing system in relationship to termination of parental rights. And his podcast is called Mining for Gold. So you can find it online, you can find it anywhere you get podcasts. Um, and then I know I said probably last, but go to Movement for Family Power. There's a movement map and there's resources. So they do a great job of collecting those things. I say they because I'm no longer the director, and they're doing amazing work. High praise to transitioning out of being directors, and they're doing amazing work to kind of map the movement.
And just to collectively, what are some lessons you learned? I mean, I think you named a number of campaigns, and we will link those for us, with your interview. But if are there like, I hate to do lists, but like, one or three lessons from your work with directly impacted parents and organizers.
Yeah, I think one lesson is that we are all in community.
Mm.
So there's idea right now that like I'm working with community that feels more like a client model
Mm,
than being in shared space. So, one, I would say yes, like you are already in community. Now, whether you have a more privileged place in that community, whether or not you choose not to listen to people in your community, whether you are, siloed, that's very different than the fact that you live in a community. It exists. And so engage with it
mm,
and be in community and live that way and don't treat it like it's a client's. Don't treat the work like, we were just talking before we coming, like treat your job like your job, but treat your work and care for each other like it's your mission because it is.
mm,
Second piece is we're in this for the long haul. So, you know, you're going to have conflict. You're going to argue with people. You're going to have disagreements.
mm,
Take what you need and move forward. This is not, organizing is not a love affair. It's not a romantic connection. It's a political project. I say to people all the time, the best lesson I started to learn was like, this is like going to the PTA. I may not like any parent at that school, but you know what we can do? We can get some money to like buy some books.
mm,
And that's what organizing is. Like we need to be able to be in political relationship with each other. We don't have to be best friends, but we do need to, I may not love my neighbor in the sense of like in fact, my neighbor right now, we don't share many commonalities, but I very much believe my neighbor deserves to live in a world without punishment,
mm,
without police, right?
mm,
And that is sufficient and that is important. And I think the other piece is that if the third idea, I think kind of really is a reflection of the first two things I talked about, but care for your people and don't think about that as separate from building movement. Raising my kids is important to me. I believe in their future. I do this because I am a mother. I mother this, my work, right? Because
mm,
I believe that they deserve to live in a world that is less harmful to them. And I have an obligation to work on that because I am their mother. That may not be everyone's perspective on their mothering. I'm not asking that to be or not, but like I do believe that we can't divorce our humanity, who we are, from building a better future. Otherwise, what future is that? That's a business, not a future. And
mm,
it's like taking care of yourself, taking care of your people, like resting, and then getting back up,
mm,
right? Because we are in a long arc. We're in a tradition of survival. We're in a tradition of thriving. And so those would kind of be the things and lessons that I've learned working and organizing, and with directly impacted people and just with the community. Like, I
mm.
think those are the things that I have learned.
Those are great, I think, and I think important to remember not to separate ourselves from the movement and community. So we will link to your excellent book. I know it's co-edited. How to end family policing from outrage to action. So this is the last question I ask all interviewees, and the question is from your location and your work. What does liberation mean to you in the context of this work? And what would a world without family policing look like, feel like? I want, in this questioning, I'm talking about look, feel, visual, so that we move outside of this sort of headspace into a more holistic space. So the way that you started the interview, I thought is very much in line where you just described it was like going up the elevator of the family court or the court system. So just feel free to like answer it in the broadest way that speaks to you.
So liberation for me in this work, it is very clear that my children will not think about the threat of their kids being taken if they choose to have kids or their friends. Just I want them to live in a world where like that's considered ludicrous.
Mm,
And that everyone would think that was the wildest thing to do as an intervention for anything, right? Like,
mm,
um, and I don't think that's impossible. And I think a world without family policing, what that would look and feel like, it would be just less stressful, more joyful. It would be, it would feel like you could tell hard things about your life without fearing that your family would fall apart or be taken.
Mm,
So it would feel unburdened in that way. And, I say this quite a lot. I think a family without family policing would mean a lot of people would be calling therapists and not inviting parents to their weddings as well, which I always tell people, I'm like, look, I'm not here to say that we will not have separations that we choose to have with each other, but I do believe a world without family policing makes it our choice
yeah.
and not the state's response. So my world without family policing is not a world without conflict, but it is a world with choice on how we decide how to manage that conflict. And we have the tools and well-being and ability to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Right, to take it away from the state and back to the individuals that have that choice and control. Thank you so much. We'll link, you mentioned a number of studies and scholars and then your own book. And along with your interview, we'll link those resources for folks to follow up on. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.